Imagine possessing the most powerful military in human history, snapping your fingers to summon your closest allies for a fight, and absolutely nothing happens. No warships, no backup, just deafening silence. For decades, the United States only had to point a finger, and a massive global coalition would instantly mobilize to crush its enemies. But when Donald Trump demanded that European and Asian allies send their fleets to the Strait of Hormuz to confront Iran, something unprecedented and, frankly, humiliating happened. They looked the undisputed leader of the free world dead in the eye and said, no. To understand the sheer magnitude of this geopolitical earthquake, we have to rewind to the golden days of the American global mob. From time immemorial, whenever Washington wanted to impose its will, or its sacred dollar, upon a nation it disliked, it never fought alone. It was a well-oiled machine. The boss gave the order, and the gang showed up. In 1999, without even waiting for a green light from the United Nations, the US formed an independent coalition to bomb Yugoslavia. 13 NATO allies immediately scrambled their fighter jets, completely crushing the South. Not a single allied nation dared to say no. Fast forward to 2003. With just a small vial of white powder presented at the UN, the US led a massive gang of 40 countries into Iraq. They unleashed a barrage of attacks that left the Iraqi regime in ashes. Saddam Hussein, once the leader of the richest country in the Gulf, was pulled from a hole in the ground. Then came 2011. NATO, acting like a thunderbolt under American direction, brought its fiery brand of democracy to Libya. Muammar Gaddafi was captured and killed, and the wealthiest nation in North Africa was reduced to a fractured state where citizens were forced to flee by sea. The formula was perfect. America leads from the front, the Allies provide the numbers, the legitimacy, and the cannon fodder. It was an undisputed unipolar world. But then, the big brother decided to kick a solid steel plates called Iran, and the entire illusion of the indestructible Western alliance shattered into a million pieces. The scene is the Strait of Hormuz, the most critical oil choke point on the planet. Tensions are boiling. Oil tankers are mysterious being sabotaged. Mines are exploding. Drones are being shot down. Donald Trump, true to his unconventional and aggressive style, takes to social media and the podium. He directly names major global powers, China, France, Japan, South Korea, the UK, demanding they send warships to escort their own oil vessels. His pitch sounded remarkably like a sketchy job posting. Bring your warships. Don't worry, we've already destroyed 100% of Iran's military capabilities. They only have a few scattered mines and some old missiles left. But behind closed doors, military strategists around the world were translating this diplomatic rhetoric into plain English. What Washington was actually saying was, we are going to stand back and snipe from a safe distance. You guys go into the narrow, mine-filled strait to deflect the missiles and take the hits. If your ship sinks, well, it's your oil anyway. The Allies weren't stupid, but surely America's oldest, most loyal friends wouldn't dare abandon the White House in its hour of need, right? What happened next was a rebellion that no one in Washington saw coming. Let's look at China first. Beijing receives nearly 90% of its oil from this very strait. Washington assumed China would have to cooperate out of sheer desperation. Trump boldly declared that countries would have to come crawling to the US to negotiate protection. But the Chinese essentially shrugged. They threatened to postpone diplomatic meetings and outright ignored the demands. Their philosophy? The earthenware jar used for pickling vegetables doesn't fear colliding with the expensive porcelain vase. China knew Trump wouldn't risk a full-scale global economic meltdown right before an election year. So, Trump pivoted to the traditional allies. He called upon Europe. Germany, the economic powerhouse of Europe and a core NATO member, was called out for being a parasite. Their response? A flat, unapologetic rejection. The German defense minister bluntly stated that Germany's mission is to protect Europe's eastern flank, not to clear sea mines in the Middle East for the US. France, Spain, and Greece? They all agreed to keep their distance, citing concerns that military intervention would cause oil prices to skyrocket and plunged the global economy into chaos. They wanted a diplomatic solution. Even NATO officially washed its hands of the situation, declaring that the Strait of Hormuz lies outside its operational area. But the most painful betrayal was yet to come. The United Kingdom, America's closest, most fiercely loyal ally, the nation that stood shoulder to shoulder in Afghanistan, Iraq and Libya. When pressed to join Trump's coalition, the UK firmly stated it was only protecting its own interests and would not join Trump's aggressive camp. Trump's reaction was explosive. It was the geopolitical equivalent of a dumped lover lashing out. He lamented publicly, complaining that the relationship just wasn't the same anymore. When Britain later showed mild signs of trying to appease him by offering a single aircraft carrier, Trump haughtily fired back, "We don't need it anymore. We don't need people who only join the war after we've already won." He was furious because Britain's refusal did something incredibly dangerous. It signaled to the rest of the world that saying no to the American president no longer carried a death sentence for a nation's foreign policy. Over in the Asia-Pacific, the script was exactly the same. Japan, heavily dependent on Middle Eastern oil, traditionally bows to US pressure. But the Japanese Prime Minister remained extremely cautious, refusing to send warships to avoid becoming a direct target of Iranian missiles. Australia? A hard no. South Korea? They opted to monitor the situation from a safe distance. Every year, these nations pay billions in defense contracts and host American bases under the promise of a global security umbrella. But the moment the boss threw them into the line of fire to act as human shields, they all collectively stepped back. As the realization set in that he was completely isolated at Hormuz, Trump's rhetoric became erratic. One moment he claimed, "We don't need anyone, we have the strongest military by far in the world." The next moment, he was bitterly complaining about the lack of gratitude. He brought up Ukraine, noting that the US was helping Europe with a crisis thousands of miles away, yet Europe wouldn't send a single minesweeper to help the US. And speaking of Ukraine, this is where the geopolitical irony reaches its absolute peak. While the rich, powerful nations of NATO were turning their backs, one country desperately raised its hand: Ukraine. Seeking to prove his loyalty to his father figure in Washington and hoping to secure continued funding and military supplies, the Ukrainian president eagerly signaled readiness to send specialized units to help the US deal with Iran. You would think the White House would welcome any friend in a storm. Instead, Trump reacted harshly. He essentially told Kyiv to mind its own business in the Middle East. Why? Because Trump didn't want troops from a country that was already borrowing American money. He wanted the wealthy countries, Japan, South Korea, Germany, to open their wallets. His ultimate goal wasn't just to build a military coalition, it was a shakedown. He wanted to collect protection money, not hand out more loans. Furthermore, letting Ukrainian troops fight alongside the US against Iran would have completely derailed Trump's complex behind-the-scenes negotiations with Russia. So, in the end, who was left? Out of the entire global community, only the tiny Baltic nation of Latvia faintly offered to consider sending ground troops if the situation truly warranted it. The entire Latvian armed forces consist of just a few thousand active personnel. Facing off against Iran's millions of soldiers and sophisticated missile arrays, sending 20 Latvian soldiers would be less of a military maneuver and more of an extreme tourism excursion. This entire fiasco wasn't just about a few boats in a strait. It was a glaring neon sign that the world order had irreversibly shifted. The days of the US snapping its fingers and assembling a 40-nation invincible armada are over. The Allies have grown weary of being threatened, humiliated, and used as bargaining chips. They realized that under the America First doctrine, their own security and economic interests were highly expendable. The US remains a military titan, but the Hormuz crisis proved that raw power without diplomatic trust leads to isolation. When you spend years treating your friends like disposable assets, you shouldn't be surprised when you look back during a crisis and find no one standing behind you. Has America permanently lost its ability to lead the free world? Or is this just a temporary fracture in the Western alliance? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you want to understand the hidden mechanics of global power that the mainstream media ignores, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. We've got a lot more to uncover.